Operations Subcommittee. Ms. Lee.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the distinguished ranking member for yielding and also for her tremendous leadership on global peace and security issues in this House. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong support of H.R. 8035. This bill provides nearly $10 billion in economic assistance for Ukraine and surrounding countries with nearly $8 billion in direct budget support. Now, when I visited Ukraine in 2019, I immediately recognized the love of the Ukrainian people for their country and for their democracy. Since the war broke out, I've met with Ukrainians in the region. Actually, I was with Speaker Pelosi during that visit, and I've met and heard firsthand the dire situations that they face amidst Russian aggression. I've talked with civil society organizations funded by the United States who, facing danger and violence, are supporting refugees, vulnerable people, women, and children. I was deeply moved by their stories and their commitment. The United States must support these brave Ukrainians in their effort to protect their sovereignty because, let's be clear, Putin will not stop until Ukraine's democracy is dismantled, and we all know that he will not stop with Ukraine. Now, as ranking member of the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee, I am proud that we are also considering other significant investments in United States global leadership today, particularly the more than $9 billion in desperately needed humanitarian assistance. We're facing historic challenges of hunger, displacement, and conflict across the globe. I was recently in Chad, one of the poorest countries in the world. Thousands of refugees are fleeing the horrific war in Sudan. They are in dire need of food and just the basics to survive. These resources will enable the United States to respond to not just the humanitarian needs that we read about on the front page, but the quieter conflicts that are destroying people's lives, such as in Sudan and Haiti. This is a defining moment in our history. I urge my colleagues to respond to the remarkable strength and resilience of the Ukrainian people and stand by them by supporting this supplemental bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you very much. I yield the gentleman from Texas, Mr. South, for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the Ukrainian Security Supplemental Appropriations Act, and I will make a glaring point. This war is not, economically speaking, even a fair fight. The gross domestic product of the European Union is 9 times that of Russia's. Their population is 3 times that of Russia's. The European Union can do more. If the United States continues to fund this effort, the EU will not muster the political will to do what they should. Yes, Russia is a strategic adversary of America, but it is a bigger threat to our European allies. NATO nations now, many are not doing the required 2% of GDP on defense. Europe must act with greater urgency. We've heard a lot about Churchill and Chamberlain. May I point out, they're both British. If the Great Britain and Europe as a whole had done more with Austria, with Sudetenland, history might be different. I implore my colleagues to put America's border security ahead of Ukraine's, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Chair, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Minnesota, the ranking member of the Defense Subcommittee, Ms. McCollum.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been 6 months since President Biden sent his security supplemental to the Congress, 2 months since the Senate passed it. But today, the House will finally act. And it's not a moment too soon, for the situation in Ukraine is dire. Vladimir Putin has failed to release thousands of Ukrainian children who have been kidnapped and continues to murder Ukrainian citizens on a daily basis. The Ukrainian military faces a severe shortage of ammunition to protect their citizens and their sovereignty. And why? Because for months this House has remained silent, but today that changes. Today we will pass this legislation. We will provide security and economic assistance to Ukraine. We will replenish depleted stocks of U.S. equipment here at home. And we will join and show the Baltic nations, Romania and Poland, that we stand with them, along with our European and NATO allies. Together, we will support the Ukrainian people in their fight for freedom. We will make it clear to authoritarian nations that America will always stand up for democracy here at home and around the world. I urge my colleagues to support these bills, and I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield to the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Flood, 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the supplemental for Ukraine. Less than 100 years ago, Joseph Stalin committed one of the largest genocides in history when he starved millions of Ukrainians to death. Today, Putin's Russia is once again stopping at nothing. They have used Ukrainian civilians as human shields, they've committed horrible acts of sexual violence, and they have abducted tens of thousands of Ukrainian children. The history of atrocities committed by tyrants against Ukraine is a stark reminder of the moral duty we have as Americans to stand with our friends and allies against tyranny and opposition. For those in our country who don't think what's happening in Ukraine has anything to do with us, Putin doesn't just want parts of Ukraine, he wants to end the post-World War II order that has underpinned freedom and economic prosperity in Europe, the United States, and beyond. This package is critical, not just for Ukraine, but for the entire free world so that we can beat back the reincarnation of what President Reagan called the evil empire. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting it. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, the ranking member of the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee, co-chair of the Ukrainian Caucus, Mr. Quigley.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just back from a third trip to Ukraine during the war, and yes, we saw evidence of these Putin war crimes, the mass graves, evidence of torture, religious persecution, kidnapping of children. It reminds us that throughout our history, in moments like this, our country has been called to act, and it did. Called to stand up in the fight for freedom and in the face of tyranny, and to be the arsenal of democracy. But in recent months, we have not met this challenge. It's been said it's never too late to do the right thing. Well, we're coming really close as we've been handcuffed by extremists and appeasers. Now the pipeline to Ukraine is almost empty. Should we now fail to send additional aid, Ukraine will lose this war, and in Putin's eyes, it will be just the beginning of his efforts to reconstitute the Soviet Union. Inaction risks not just the fate of democracy, but the possibility of drawing our own country directly into war. So today it's particularly important that we heed the voices from the past, from President Ronald Reagan as he espoused the Reagan Doctrine, that we will always defend our friends and allies against Soviet aggression. From President Kennedy saying, we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and success of liberty. And finally, in his last inaugural, FDR, who reminded us, we have learned that we cannot live alone, at peace, that our well-being is dependent on the well-being of other nations far away. We can and must act. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I would now like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Chief Jimenez.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the supplemental for Ukraine. For the past 2 years, Ukraine has valiantly fought against the barbaric and unjustified invasion by Vladimir Putin and Russia. We have now reached an inflection point. Ukraine is running out of time, bullets, and arms necessary to defeat Russia. This supplemental will allow Ukraine to counter Russia with new and more advanced aid. It will also help by replenishing U.S. weapons, stocks, and facilities. America is seen as the beacon of hope across the globe, and our enemies are watching our actions closely today. As the Chinese Communist Party, Iran, North Korea, and even Cuba all line up behind Putin, it is time to do the same for our friends and allies. When I was 6 years old, my family fled my native homeland of Cuba. I personally know the evils of communism. The freedoms of this country are what brought my family here. They are worth fighting for. The Ukrainian people are only asking for help in fighting for that same freedom. And what is the cost of freedom? Is there a cost for freedom? Can you put a price tag on it? Today is a chance to bolster our international reputation as a faithful ally and to prove that we will not falter under pressure. This is an opportunity to help our allies and discourage our adversaries. I urge support and yield back.
Gentleman, time's had expired. Gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I am prepared to close, and I reserve my time.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Florida. is recognized.
I also will reserve at this time.
Gentleman reserves.
If I may,
Gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
I am ready to close, Mr. Chairman, if the gentlewoman as well.
Gentlelady from Connecticut recognized.
Mr. Chairman, this needs to be a proud moment for all of us. This country, this great United States of America, has always led, has always taken the high ground and the moral responsibility to do the right thing. To support a nation which has only asked us to help them maintain their sovereignty, maintain democracy, and let them ally with us in the United States. The Speaker of this House has come out in support of aid to Ukraine. He said, and I quote, "History judges us for what we do." This is a critical time in the world, on the world stage, and the Speaker continued, "I would rather send bullets to Ukraine than American boys." We need to send military equipment, arms, what Ukraine needs to defeat an aggressor who is responsible for the death of millions of civilians. We have a moment today to say no to tyranny. We have a moment to take back the moral high ground for the United States, and that say we do not walk away from an ally. We do not walk away from freedom. We do not walk away from human rights. We do not walk away from democracy. That is not the United States of America. Winston Churchill once said, "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." We know of no nation today who has had the courage to continue as Ukraine has. And the United States needs to have the courage to stand up and to help them continue when it counts and defeat a tyrant and autocrat whose relish for power knows no bounds. It is our moral responsibility. Today, we need to stand with Ukraine. I urge my colleagues to support this bill.
The gentlewoman has yielded back. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. In closing, we may be nearing a dangerous inflection point in this war. If the thug Putin were to win, it would be a disaster for our national security, frankly, on par with the Biden administration's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. Imagine how this outcome would embolden Russia's key strategic ally, Communist China, to undertake military coercion and aggression against Taiwan, and the fateful consequences that would stem from that. I want to remind my colleagues that appeasement never works. Harry Truman and Ronald Reagan both understood, as President Reagan said, and I quote, "We know only too well that war comes not when the forces of freedom are strong, but when they are weak. It is then that tyrants are tempted. It is time to be resolute. Let's heed the lessons of history and support this bill." Finally, I want to thank Speaker Johnson for his principled leadership and his fortitude in moving forward with this bill in the face of daunting obstacles. His resolve is a testament to his strength of character. I also want to thank Chairman Cole, Ranking Member DeLauro for their leadership on this bill. I urge a strong yes vote, and with that, I yield back the remaining part of my time.
The gentleman yields. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The amendment printed in Part A of the House Report 118-466 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill, as amended, shall be considered as read. No further amendment to the bill as amended is in order except those printed in Part B of House Report 118-466. Each such further amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report. Shall be considered read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider the Amendment 1 printed in Part B of House Report 118-466. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-466, offered by Mrs. Sparts of Indiana.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1160, the gentlewoman from Indiana, Ms. Sparts, and a member opposed shall each control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume. I have held a very principled position on Ukraine, and unfortunately, this position is not very shared with a lot of people in Congress. It's unfortunately, we have the false choice of either saying that Ukraine doesn't matter to America, or support Ukraine with no question asked, with blank checks. And both these positions are not good in our national interest, and both of these positions are not good in the interest of the people of Ukraine. And unfortunately, this monopoly of narratives prevailing in our government, in our society, and in Congress. So my amendment is actually very simple. And I know this is just, we're doing this amendment just for the show, and no one is going to pass anything on the floor. We still will go with blank checks and slush funds, and unfortunately, this strategy failed the American people. President Biden failed the American people on the border, on national security. Congress failed the American people on the border, on national security. President Biden and President Zelensky failed the Ukrainian people. They were not ready before the war started. They didn't have good strategy when the war started, slow-walked the aid, and really didn't fight and deter Putin to go further. And now we have a very significant war in Europe. And I said, unfortunately, this supplemental doesn't just have a lethal aid, it's had other parts, and they will go further, and unfortunately, no one is going to be taking our amendments. So because we have presentations and circuses, but decisions already made. So my amendment is actually very simple. It just says we shouldn't have blank check and let President Biden have presidential drawdowns increase from 100 million to 8 billion, including loans from 4 to 8 billion. So we're generally giving true blank check to President Biden of $16 billion. Congress forgot, that we should do our jobs. We shouldn't create these loopholes for presidents, doesn't matter who the president is, to be able to do what they want to do. This is our job to oversee these funds. So very simple amendment. This emergency that we created now go to the point where giving billions of dollars Congress and not doing its job. We have the power of the purse for a reason. So all it does, this amendment, it eliminates 4 sections that increasing, and it's a true blank check. Because when we say that presidential drawdown goes from 100 million to 8 billion almost, or from 200 to 400 million, from 25 to 50 million, we really don't even know what he's going to do. He can do whatever he wants with that. And that is a big problem, because these emergencies are dangerous, but also, what the problem we have right now, that in case of these emergencies, we actually don't have ability even to ask the questions, and Congress hasn't been asking questions. That's why we have such a major catastrophe around the world, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's Ukraine, and that's why China, Russia and Iran are moving, and we're doing a lot of presentation with blank checks and slush funds and no policies. And so I would urge my colleagues to think maybe for a change and give this amendment consideration, which I have a very low expectations. And I also would consider, as I said, to supporting lethal aid with border security. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And it's sad for me to see that we still don't take this war as serious as we should be, because generally only 13.7 billion actually go to security assistance directly to Ukraine. From this 60 billion plus another 8 billion slush fund. So we're talking almost $70 billion plus another 8 billion of loans, whoever they go to. So we're talking about almost 80. So I have a problem with that, and I reserve.
Woman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Connecticut?
Mr. Chair, I claim time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
This war is an existential conflict for Ukraine. As important, it is a test for the United States and the United States leadership. One of the best tools we have to get the Ukrainians what they need is presidential drawdown authority. This allows the United States to send equipment from our stocks to the front line in a matter of days. There isn't time to delay. This amendment would cut that authority from $7.8 billion to $100 million. It ties our hands, and yes, it hamstrings the Ukrainian military to do the job that they need to do to defeat Putin. We all lose if Ukraine succumbs to Putin's ambitions, and it will not stop there. Putin in 2016 asserted that Russia's borders do not end, and this is a quote, do not end anywhere. Russian officials just this spring have threatened Finland, Romania, Armenia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Moldova, removing the best tool that the United States has to exercise in terms of a moral clarity and responsibility, that we can move quickly to arm our allies would be a grave mistake. Please vote no on this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlelady yielded back. The gentlelady
How much time
from
do I have
India.
remaining?
Gentlewoman has 30 seconds.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to highlight we are increasing blank check from 100 million to 8 billion, and we don't even know if it's spent for Ukraine or not. Just a blank check of 16 billion to President Biden, purely blank check. And I hope that my colleagues will support that, because we need to stop slush fund and blank checks. We will never win against aggressors if we continue Congress not do its job. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Indiana. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
I request a recorded vote.
What purpose does the gentlelady from Indiana seek recognition?
I request yeas and nays.
Do you request a recorded vote?
Recorded vote.
Okay, so pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Indiana will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in Part B of House Report 118-466. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-466, offered by Ms. Green of Georgia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1160, the gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Green, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My amendment today would drive the amendment, the bill for Ukraine, take each dollar amount in this act is hereby reduced to zero. You see, the United States taxpayer has already sent $113 billion to Ukraine, and a lot of that money is unaccounted for. This is a continuance of a sick business model that the American government continues. The federal government continues to fund the military-industrial complex, and this is a business model that requires Congress to continue to vote for money, to continue to fund foreign wars, and this is a business model the American people do not support. They don't support a business model built on blood and murder and war in foreign countries, while this very government does nothing to secure our border. The American people are over $34 trillion in debt, and the debt is rising by over $40 billion every single night while we all sleep. But yet nothing is done to secure our border or reduce our debt. Inflation has driven out of control. Americans are suffering every single day. They can hardly afford their grocery bills. They can hardly afford gas in their car. They can hardly afford rent. And now mortgage payments are well over $3,000, where they were only just over $1,700 3 years ago. The youngest generation, young adults, don't even think they're going to be able to buy a home in their lifetime. And today in Congress, the most important thing that this body thinks should be done is to send another $61 billion to a war in Ukraine that the American people by 70% do not support. Mind you, this comes on the very heels of Monday being April 15th, tax day, where every single American had to scrounge up their money and send their dollars in to the IRS. Or some of them had to file extensions because they weren't ready and didn't have the money to pay their taxes. But today, this body says the most important thing we can do, no, is not reduce spending. That's not it. Not to do anything to drive down inflation. Oh, no, we can't do that for the American people. It's not to secure our own border that is invaded every single day, by people from over 160 different countries. No, don't secure the American border. Let everyone in. We have over 1.8 million known gotaways. We don't know who these people are. And yet you have members of this body talking big and tough about, oh, we have to defeat Russia. Oh, we have to protect Ukraine. But yet all of you are unwilling to protect the American citizens that pay your paycheck, pay the light bills in this building, and pay for this entire federal government. For what? For nothing. Ukraine is not even a member of NATO. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but the most important thing you hear in Washington, D.C. is, oh, we have to spend Americans' hard-earned tax dollars over to Ukraine and keep the money going to continue to murder Ukrainians, wipe out an entire generation of Ukrainian men so that there are widows, there are fatherless orphans, there are not enough men to work in their industries. Oh, but you really support Ukraine. Wow, what kind of support is that? It's repulsive. You know, shame on the American government. Shame on the American government. If we support our military, support our military. We should be funding to build up our weapons and ammunition, not to send it over to foreign countries to kill foreign peoples. And if this body was worth what it claims to be, what it is, every single one of us would be demanding peace in Ukraine between these countries, peace for these people, so that no more of them have to die. But you never hear anybody demanding peace. No, 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 no. Peace is the last thing Washington wants because it doesn't fit the business model. This is a business model that they say continues our economy, protects American jobs. What a disgusting business model. We should have a business model that builds up our American companies and American jobs to serve American interests, and our military and our government should care about protecting the national security of the United States of America and the Americans that pay their hard-earned tax dollars to fund all of this. America last. America last. That's all this is. Every single day, America last.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
I yield.
Gentlewoman yields. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Connecticut seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I rise in opposition to this amendment, strong opposition to this amendment, which would eviscerate
Gentlewoman is recognized for
the bill.
5 minutes.
Thank you. In the post-World War II construct, the United States is a witness to the world on the values of democracy and freedom. These values have provided the United States of America with strong allies across the globe. It has helped our partners in Europe and NATO to support Ukraine against Vladimir Putin's unjust war. If we do not provide munitions, Ukraine will fall and Putin will be emboldened. And the Green Amendment allows Putin to control Europe, abdicating our leadership role and promises to our allies cannot happen. We must support Ukraine's defense. The world prior to World War II was unstable, with authoritarian fascist leaders seeking power, and voting no on this amendment will ensure that history does not, in fact, repeat itself. I urge all of you to vote no. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady has the only time.
2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Minnesota, the ranking member of the Defense Subcommittee, Ms. McCollum.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the ranking member. I rise in very strong opposition to this amendment. Cutting the funding in this bill would be devastating. To zero out our support for Ukraine would only embolden Putin more. As I said earlier, murdering civilians on a daily basis is what the Russian government is up to, as well as holding thousands of Ukrainian children as captives. As ranking member of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, I know the funds included in this bill will provide Ukraine with the vital support they need to defend themselves. If this amendment were to pass, we would send a signal that the United States does not stand against Putin's campaign of death and destruction in Ukraine. We absolutely must stand against Putin's aggression. If Putin is allowed to succeed in snuffing out Ukraine's democracy, it will put our allies in the Balkan states, Poland, Romania, and other NATO partners at great risk. The funds in this bill also strengthens America's national security by supporting our operations in Europe, backfilling our own military stocks so that we are prepared. I strongly urge a no vote on this amendment, and Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Gentlewoman from Connecticut.
Mr. Chair, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Washington, the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, Mr. Smith.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to focus on one argument of the sponsor of this amendment, who's basically saying that if we pass this bill, we are advocating the killing of Ukrainians. That is a uniquely demented way of looking at this war. Putin invades. Putin, as we speak, is bombing and killing Ukrainian civilians. And the only thing that is reducing the number that he can kill is the Ukrainians' ability to fight back. So to look at this from a pure Russian propaganda standpoint, they invade, they bomb, they kill, and it's our fault for helping the Ukrainians defend themselves. That is the argument here against supporting Ukraine, and it literally makes no sense. If you want peace, give the Ukrainians the strength to stop Putin. He is the one that will not come to the bargaining table right now because he thinks he's winning. He thinks he can go all the way to Kyiv. He thinks he can take the whole country. If we give the Ukrainians the ability to stop him, that forces him to the table. It makes no sense to say that giving the Ukrainians the ability to defend themselves is what's killing them, when it is very clearly the Russians that are killing them. And I would also note that no president has added more to the deficit in one 4-year, or the debt, sorry, in one 4-year term than President Trump. And I didn't hear a single Republican complaining about the debt or the deficit during that period of time. The Ukrainians need our help to bring peace, to stop Putin, to stop what he is trying to do. Also, to Ms. McCollum's point, this also helps our industrial base. We face a dangerous world between Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, all of whom are working together, by the way. If we don't help Ukraine stop Russia, that helps Iran, that helps China, that helps North Korea. This is about our national security, which I am quite confident that whether asleep or awake, the American people also care dearly about. Please defeat this amendment and support Ukraine and support United States national security interests. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Woman from Connecticut is recognized.
Speaker, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not.
Mr. Speaker,
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Georgia seek
I
recognition?
ask for the yeas and nays.
The gentlewoman asked for a
Recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Georgia will be postponed. The chair understands that Amendment 3 will not be offered. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 4, printed in Part B of House Report 118-466. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-466, offered by Mrs. Kamic of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1160, the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Kamic, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of my amendment to H.R. 8035, which would eliminate all non-military funding in this Ukrainian aid package. Breaking this down a bit, that would mean cutting nearly $10.5 billion, with a B, from this whopping $60 billion Ukrainian bill. To date, American taxpayers have already given $113 billion to Ukraine since Russia's invasion. This new spending, $60 billion, is designated as emergency spending, meaning it goes straight to our national debt, a national debt that grows every single second to the tune of $8 billion every single day. Since Russia has invaded Ukraine in February of 2022, there has been robust debate in Congress, in this chamber, about the United States' role in the war. Now, while we here in this chamber disagree on the role that we should play, there is one thing that I hope that we can agree on. We, as the United States representatives, should not, and I repeat, should not, forsake our own national security in favor of another nation. We should not secure the borders of nations abroad while simultaneously ignoring the very real and very dangerous border crisis in our own country. While we should debate the merits of providing funds for weapons and equipment to defeat Russia in this conflict, funds that fall outside of immediate, narrow, and lethal aid should not warrant the same urgency or consideration. All told, sections of this bill that are not lethal aid come right to about $10.5 billion, with the bulk of it going to support the Ukrainian economy. Not the American economy, the Ukrainian economy. And anyone who is living under Biden's economic plan right now knows that it sucks. We need to be clear. This is emergency spending, again, going straight to our national debt, full stop. And again, we are borrowing $8 billion a day. Over the past 20 years, Congress has designated $12 trillion in emergency spending. With these funds in the bill that are not designated for military purposes, the American people are resigned, once again, to absorbing another $10.5 billion to support Ukraine and their economy, while simultaneously adding the debt to our $34.7 trillion national debt. That is simply unacceptable. We are robbing Peter to pay Paul, and the American people are once again left holding the bag. You cannot stand here on this chamber's floor as a representative of the American people in the people's house and sincerely say that you have done everything possible to look out for American national security and American economic security if we don't narrow the focus of this bill. We have to adopt this amendment. And by the way, while I was speaking, we have added another $5.5 million to the national debt. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
I claim the time in opposition, if you would.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to this amendment from one of the people that I most admire, and again, a dear friend and a colleague from Florida. This is clearly a well-intended amendment. And frankly, when I was listening to her presentation, there are so many things that I agreed with what she said. But it would strike all funding in the bill except for the foreign military financing. And so, as I mentioned, there's so many things that I agree with what she said. I agree, for example, that over time the United States we must focus its effort on really intelligence and essential military support. I totally agree with that. She also talked about how we need to narrow the scope. I would argue that, unfortunately, the amendment needs to be narrowed a bit, should have been narrowed a bit, because it would be really, really counterproductive the way it's written at this time. And let me respectfully explain why. First, the amendment would zero out funding to keep U.S. personnel in our embassy in Ukraine safe. I don't think that's something that we should be doing right now. Also, the funding to enhance the U.S. government's presence in order to conduct oversight, which is something that I've been clamoring for, a lot of us have been clamoring for, begging and pleading and working for, well, this would eliminate that as well. And by the way, it would eliminate it including for the oversight of the military portion of the assistance. Now, secondly, it would eliminate funding for the State Department's and USAID's Inspector General, from whom we require unprecedented oversight plans. But then, obviously, we need to give them the resources for this critical work, because we have to have oversight. And that's something that I know that, at least on my side of the aisle, we all agree on, regardless of what you believe our role should be in Ukraine. And again, unfortunately, as I mentioned, this would eliminate that, the funding for that. Third, it would also eliminate funding for investigations of Russian war crimes in Ukraine, and as well as assistance to help secure Ukrainian nuclear facilities. And we've seen those in the news under threat by the Russians. And also the funds for potential clearance of Russian mines. And finally, it would eliminate economic support for Ukraine. And that is something that the sponsor of this amendment is really focused on. But I would argue, even there, that is essential at this moment, right now. Look, it's pretty clear that Putin has been targeting farmlands and infrastructure, energy infrastructure, road infrastructure, and Ukraine's industrial base. And by the way, he's doing that for a reason. You see, crippling Ukraine's economy, and Putin knows this, has a direct impact on Ukraine's ability to stop Putin. So now, as chairman of the State of Foreign Operations Subcommittee, I can assure you that not only do I understand the sponsor of this amendment's frustration, I get it, I share it. But that's why, again, we need to have the language that's currently in the bill. I understand her concern and her frustration because of the lack of transparency and strategy on the funding that has already been provided. So that's why this is very clear. That's why this legislation includes many of the critical oversight and burden-sharing priorities that I'm very proud originated in the FY24 State Foreign Operations Bill. These include unprecedented cost matching requirements so that other donors step up. They must step up. The bill imposes layers and layers and layers of conditions on the funding, including for in-person monitoring, for example. This bill requires, I know, novel concept, a strategy that must be developed and submitted so that Congress can evaluate the execution of aid and its alignment with U.S. national security interests. Another significant change, by the way, from the Senate supplemental is a requirement in this bill that the economic support to Ukraine be repaid, transforming assistance from a grant to a loan. I am so grateful to the sponsor of this amendment for her work. I appreciate the intent of this amendment, but we cannot afford to shortchange our oversight funding, our diplomatic security funding, and other strategic priorities. So for those reasons, with, again, the great admiration and respect for the sponsor of this amendment, I must urge a no vote on this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And let me just begin by saying the feeling is mutual. I have tremendous respect and admiration for my colleague from the Sunshine State. And I hear loud and clear the critical elements of this bill that have been deemed necessary. Heck, I deem them necessary. The American people and the representatives in this chamber, we demand fully accountability and transparency. However, there are multiple poison pills within this text that the American people, and certainly not my constituents back home, support. For example, $300 million for international narcotics control and law enforcement. What about the 100,000 plus people every single year in America that are being poisoned by fentanyl? Where is the funding to stop the flow of fentanyl into the United States? What about the $25 million for transition initiatives? What about the $60 million for diplomatic programs? I noticed that my colleague, again, who I deeply respect, he mentioned that part of that is for security, but what about the rest? Or the $481 million for refugee and entrance assistance? We have a border crisis that has resulted in one of the most egregious public health, public safety, humanitarian, and national security crises in American history. We are approaching over 10 million illegals crossing into our country, being quote unquote paroled, which is just a fancy way of saying catch and release, into the United States, approaching 2 million gotaways. We have a massive crisis here at home, and if America is not safe and secure here at home, we cannot help our partners abroad. I urge respectfully that my colleagues put America first and adopt this amendment. With that, I yield.
The gentlewoman from Florida yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chairs, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Speaker, I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Florida will be postponed. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now move that the committee do rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee rise. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
Very emotional.
The ayes have it. The motion is adopted according to the committee rises.
Mr. Chairman, the Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has under consideration H.R. 8035 and has come to no resolution thereon. For what purpose does the gentleman from California, Mr. Calvert, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 1160, I call up the bill H.R. 8034, the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2024, and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 8034, a bill making emergency supplemental appropriations to respond to the situation in Israel and for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1160, the bill is considered read. The bill shall be debatable for 30 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the committee on the appropriations of their respective designees. The gentleman from California, Mr. Calvert, and the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro, will each control 15 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Calvert.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the measure under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself what time I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to offer House Resolution 8034, the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2024. This bill provides $26.38 billion to fortify America's support of our Israeli allies and defend our troops in the region. It is part of a larger package of 3 security supplemental appropriation acts before us: Israel, Ukraine, and Indo-Pacific. All 3 are essential to deter our adversaries. There are moments where actions is optional, a convenience but not a necessity, a choice. This is not one of those moments. The world is in chaos. Americans have been killed, and our allies and partners are dying in the front lines every day. Ukraine is entering its 3rd year of a war to repel Russia's invasion. While forced to conserve their munitions and choose which areas to defend, Israel is avenging its innocent civilians who were murdered, raped, brutalized, and taken hostage by Hamas, while defending its country from a barrage of Iranian missiles. Indo-Pacific nations face China daily with strength and resolve, knowing they are likely next. The United States is not on the sidelines in these conflicts. Our service members are under daily attack in the Red Sea, standing watch along NATO's eastern flank, and being routinely challenged in the Indo-Pacific. 5 American flag-draped coffins have returned home in the past 6 months. When we go to war with what we have. There is no time to forge new alliances, no ability to reconstruct abandoned production lines, and no hidden reserve of fully trained and ready troops. This is the situation our allies and partners in Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and other Indo-Pacific nations face today. It is a situation ourselves may face sooner than we think. Xi, Putin, Kamic, and terrorist leaders will not back down unless met with a strong and resolute America, standing shoulder to shoulder with our constellation of allies and partners. These bills provide the funding necessary to defeat and deter our enemies. While the bills carry the names of other countries, there is one nation that I care about above all others, and that is ours. These conflicts have exposed the fragility of our defense industrial base and dire need to invest in factories, shipyards, assembly lines that manufactures the instruments of our national defense. In recognition of this fact, over $59 billion across these bills go into our defense industrial base, including $3.3 billion to supercharge a submarine industrial base, $29.5 billion to replenish our stocks of U.S. defense systems and services provided to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, $1.13 billion to expand procurement and development of artillery and critical munitions. Each conflict has its unique needs and is addressed in these bills, including $5.2 billion to replenish Israel's Iron Dome, David Sling, and procure the Iron Beam missile defense systems, $542 million for unfunded priorities requested by the Indo-PACOM commander, and $13.8 billion directly to procure U.S. capability for Ukraine. Our servicemen and women across the globe are being asked to operate at a wartime tempo to track, respond, and engage emerging threats. These bills provide the resources necessary to support their operations, with $11.3 billion for current U.S. operations in Europe, $2.4 billion for our forces in the Middle East, who are under daily attack. Mr. Speaker, we have been complacent for far too long, as our allies and partners and our own service members have been under attack. This Congress has a solemn obligation to our military to provide them with the resources they need to deter and win our nation's wars. Douglas MacArthur once said that the history of the failure of war can almost be summed up in 2 words: too late. When conflict occurs, we will fight with what we have and who is with us. Mr. Speaker, I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on these bills to ensure our military readiness and revigorate American defense industry. I encourage them to vote yes to reinforce our Israeli, Ukrainian, Taiwanese, and Indo-Pacific allies and partners. I encourage them to vote yes so that future generations may write on what we did here today. They weren't too late. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized.
Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act, which will provide Israel with desperately needed aid to respond to the horrific October 7th attacks and protect itself from Iran and its proxies. What happened in Israel on October 7th was horrifying. On a recent trip to Israel, I saw firsthand the remnants of the violence that innocent people were subjected to, including the site of the Supernova Sukkot gathering, the gathering at which it was a music festival that Hamas attacked, Kibbutz Berei and the homes where so many were massacred, and Hostage Square, where I met with families of those taken hostage by Hamas. The United States has not forgotten October 7th, and today we are providing the aid Israel has needed since the day Hamas terrorists killed innocent Israeli civilians in the worst attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust. Just last weekend, Israel was openly and directly attacked by Iran. I applaud the role of the United States in providing Israel with support in its defense against that attack. But while we must ensure Israel can stand strong in the face of adversaries like Iran that seek its annihilation, we must also ensure that every step possible is taken to protect innocent life in Gaza and elsewhere. On my trip, we also went to Kirbet Zenuta, a Palestinian village in the West Bank, where settlers destroyed homes and a school. On the trip, we were also briefed from Gaza by humanitarian organizations, including UNRWA, which have lost hundreds of staff to the violence. To that end, I have called for an immediate ceasefire of at least 6 weeks to facilitate the safe delivery of aid to civilians in Gaza. We must protect aid workers. We must open additional crossings to bring in at least 500 trucks a day and ensure that food is never used as a weapon of war. Innocent families are in danger. Children are starving, and civilian casualties are mounting, not just in Gaza, but in conflict zones all around the world. The more than $9 billion in humanitarian support in this bill would make sure that we are not leaving Gazans, the Ukrainians, the Sudanese, the Haitians, or the Rohingya behind. We must pass this bill, ensure Israel has the resources it needs to defend itself, and that much-needed humanitarian aid can flow to millions of vulnerable people around the world. I urge your support, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from Georgia, a member of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Clyde, for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Calvert. I will always stand with our greatest ally in the Middle East, Israel, but I rise today to express my serious concerns with a very flawed supplemental. In November, I supported the first security supplemental for Israel, which was financially paid for and would have provided weapons and equipment for Israel's fight against Hamas. The cost was offset by rescinding Democrats' unprecedented expansion of the IRS. Today, we are considering a vastly different bill, one that is all borrowing, another $26 billion of debt with no rescissions. The legislation also contains $400 million for FEMA, which has nothing to do with supporting Israel, and over $9 billion for humanitarian aid in Hamas-controlled Gaza and the West Bank. A report from the Heritage Foundation stated the problem with aid diversion to Hamas and other terrorist groups plagues all international and non-governmental aid organizations operating in Gaza. It is therefore highly likely that U.S. taxpayer-funded humanitarian aid to Gaza, including some of the aid in this bill, would again be diverted to support further Hamas attacks against Israel. Why would we knowingly be sending money into the hands of Hamas in any bill? If we are feeding Gaza, we are feeding Hamas.
Fired.
Therefore, with great disappointment, I cannot in good conscience vote for this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman reserves. The gentlelady is recognized.
Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, the ranking member of the Financial Services and General Government Subcommittee, Mr. Hoyer.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of this legislation. All of the bills will address the issues at hand. I often say it's never too late to do the right thing. But waiting to do the right thing comes at a cost. We saw that cost in Israel this week as an emboldened Iran launched an unprecedented attack on our ally. For Ukraine, the cost of our inaction is great, if incalculable. It is measured in Ukrainian lives, towns, and territory lost. For 478 days, Congress's words of support fell silent on Ukrainian ears, deafened by the air raid sirens, artillery bombardment, and drone attacks. Today, we act. We act to make it clear to the world that America is still the defender of freedom, democracy, and international law, as well as our friends and allies, and the opponent of tyrants and terrorists. I urge my colleagues to vote yes. Vote yes to show Jews in Israel, America, and beyond that this Congress will always stand up for their safety. Vote yes to demonstrate to Russia, Iran, North Korea, and every other authoritarian despot, and to terrorists everywhere, that America remains committed to defending freedom here and around the world. Let our bipartisan support for our allies endure in the months ahead, whether it's to secure the release of the 134 hostages held captive in Gaza or to turn back Putin's criminal invasion. The voice of resolve and opposition to tyranny must not be muted, nor should it be delayed. Let us pray that the majority that speaks today will remain loud and clear for all to hear.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Ukraine and Israel are in growing danger of running out of arms and ammunition while China casts a hungry eye on Taiwan. History warns us of allowing aggression to grow unchecked and of how quickly events in an unstable world can unravel. Profligate spending is exhausting our resources and damaging our economy, but as Reagan reminded us, defense is not a budget issue. You spend what you need to spend. And although the defense of these besieged nations is one step removed from our own, it would be a very good thing to keep it that way. I regret that the 3 military aid bills are larded up with about $20 billion of economic handouts, but we are out of options and we are out of time. I'm afraid that's the price we now have to pay for months of dithering in this House. Without these bills today, we and the world risk a future butcher's bill that is incalculable. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady is recognized.
Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, the ranking member of the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Subcommittee, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, it is incomprehensible that the Israeli hostages captured on Simchas Torah are still in Hamas's captivity as we approach Passover. I rise to finally provide long overdue aid to our ally Israel as she fights to defend herself against threats on multiple fronts. On October 7th, Hamas launched a massacre that led to the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. Hamas murdered, raped, and captured Israelis, Americans, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and people from dozens of countries. Hamas broke a ceasefire and declared war on humanity. Since that bloody day, Hamas terrorists have promised to carry out the attack again and again. I recently visited Israel for the 3rd time since October 7th. I saw the realities of Hamas's dedication to annihilate Israel. I will never be able to unsee the images at the Nova Festival site where Hamas massacred hundreds of young people. The road leading towards the site is littered with burn marks, where cars with people fleeing for their lives were burned alive on the spot. You walk into the festival site and see hundreds of memorials to the innocent victims who were murdered in cold blood. At Kibbutz Kfar Aza, we saw homes riddled with bullet holes and burned to the ground with people still in them. This is what Israel is up against. This is what Israel must defend against. Maniacal terrorism dedicated to the destruction of not just the state of Israel, but of all Jews. Israel fights not only to destroy Hamas's Iran-backed military capabilities, but to send a clear message to our adversaries who seek to erase the Jewish state: you will not be successful. President Biden, Leader Jeffries, and Democrats have fought for months to send this critical security assistance, as well as life-saving humanitarian aid for the Palestinian people who are also victims of Hamas. A vote against this bill is a vote to deny that aid. I am proud to support this vital effort to help Israel in this existential battle and aid civilians, and I urge my colleagues to join me to free Gaza from Hamas. Am Israel Chai. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Lawler, 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Our country is at a most critical juncture. Do we take a step back, watch our allies fall, and allow terror to spread? Or do we stand strong as leader of the free world and stand up for our allies and take on our adversaries? To me, the answer is clear. The legislation we're debating today has the potential to turn the tide in Ukraine, protect our ally Israel, and deter China from attacking Taiwan. There's no question that under the Biden administration, the world has become a tinderbox. Conflict erupting across the globe. Our allies are under attack. China, Russia, and Iran are engaged in an unholy alliance, seeking to undermine and destabilize the U.S., Israel, and the free world. We are the leader of the free world. It requires us to lead. We cannot abdicate the responsibilities that come along with it. The time for choosing is here. The time for action is now. I choose to act in defense of freedom, democracy, and America's role in the world. I support aid to our allies. I support holding our adversaries accountable. And I support America being that shining city upon a hill.
Expired.
We cannot give in. Victory at all cost.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman is recognized.
Speaker, I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, a member of the Appropriations Committee, Ms. Frankel.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge support of this bill, which sends military aid to Israel to defend herself, protects U.S. troops in the Middle East, and provides urgently needed food and medicine to those suffering in places like Gaza, Sudan, and Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, my grandfather, Abe, he fled Europe as the Nazis took over, as they murdered 6 million Jews. Today, almost half of the world's Jewish population, over 7 million people, live in Israel. And with calls from river to the sea, Iran's regime and its proxies have vowed to wipe Israel off the map. Hezbollah fires rockets. Hamas brutally attacks innocent Israelis, raping women, taking hostages. Iran sends a barrage of missiles as it builds its nuclear arsenal. Make no mistake, Iran is not our friend either. Israel's security is our security. And without our attention and resources, the Middle East is at risk. The funding in this bill will save lives. Missile defense for our ally, protecting our troops in the Middle East, and humanitarian aid for the heartbreaking need around the world. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields. Reserves. Gentleman is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Kane, for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 8034, the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2024. This bill will ensure that Israel has the means to defeat its enemies and defend its people. This legislation also sends a signal to Iran and its proxies that the United States stands with its allies and partners in the Middle East and will remain a strong presence in the region. I also urge support for the Ukraine Security Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2024. Ukraine is fighting for its life every day against Vladimir Putin. Make no mistake, Putin is seeking to extend his control over Central and Eastern Europe, including nations who are now NATO allies. He does not recognize national sovereignty or borders. Putin is deepening his ties with Iran. These bills are not only for the security and preservation of Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, but also for continued American leadership on the world stage. We must stand together with our allies
Gentleman's
and
time
partners
has
and
expired.
against authoritarianism. Thank you.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Pocan, a member of the Appropriations Committee.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the October 7th Hamas attack, Netanyahu has responded with a widespread bombing campaign in Gaza. Just yesterday, 9 Palestinians were killed in a strike near Rafah, 6 being children. This is anything but going after Hamas. This is a collective punishment of all Palestinians in Gaza. Netanyahu doesn't support the United States' position of a two-state solution for peace. He doesn't respect our urges not to invade Rafah. He disputes what the U.S. and aid groups have said about famine taking over in Gaza, and he launched an attack on Iran after the White House told him not to. If he's not listening to us on matters of international security, how can he be trusted with more offensive weapons? Enough is enough. I support the people of Israel who don't want bombs raining on them from extremists in Gaza, and the hostages must be released. And I also support the Palestinians who deserve human rights and dignity. 35,000 people have been killed and thousands more will die from starvation and disease. We are better than that. So is Israel. I'm not sure Netanyahu is, and that's why I can't vote to provide him with more unconditional offensive weapons today, and I urge a no vote, and I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New Jersey, Chris Smith.
Thank you.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the United States must make absolutely clear in both word and deed, not just today, but every day, and without equivocation, that we stand with Israel. Both defensive weapon systems like Iron Dome and David's Sling and all necessary offensive military capabilities must be conveyed without delay to Israel for as long as it takes to defeat Hamas and to deter Iran, Hezbollah, and other radical Islamists. Of significance, H.R. 8034 prohibits aid to Gaza from flowing through UNRWA, an anti-Semitic, disgraceful organization that teaches Palestinian children to hate Jews, glorifies suicidal martyrdom, and the evisceration of Israel as a state. UNRWA is a child soldiers' factory that we have funded for decades. 21 years ago, on this floor, 2003, I offered an amendment that passed the House to defund UNRWA. Senate never acted. A few weeks ago, the Foreign Affairs Committee passed my bill to stop UNRWA funding. This bill, and I thank my friends for bringing it to the floor, defunds UNRWA. Israel has an absolute right to exist, free from aggression
Gentleman's time
and
has expired.
anti-Semitic hate. Thank you.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman.
Gentleman is recognized.
I want to focus on the 40% of this bill that gets little or no attention. It provides $9.1 billion in humanitarian aid, and that aid is unearmarked. So at a hearing last week, I got the administration to go on record as to where that money will be spent. It will be spent in Haiti, where 80% of the capital is in the hands of gangs and hundreds of thousands have been forced to flee. It will be spent in Sudan, where 18 million people face acute food insecurity due to civil war. It'll be spent in Ethiopia, where we've seen the highest casualty war of this decade. 500,000 Tigrayans have died, and now millions face famine. It will be spent in eastern Congo, where 7 million people have been displaced by war. It'll be spent on the 1.1 million Rohingya in camps who are there due to ethnic cleansing by Myanmar, and where rations have recently been cut by 30% due to lack of funding. It'll be spent in Armenia, where 120,000 refugees are there because of Azerbaijan's ethnic cleansing. It will be spent to meet the critical needs in Gaza. This bill will save hundreds of thousands, I believe millions of lives. Vote yes, and I want to commend President Biden for putting this whole package together back in October. It is
Gentleman's time has
to pass
expired.
it now.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Gentleman is recognized.
Speaker, several months ago, myself and a bipartisan group of my colleagues introduced a bill, the Defending Borders, Defending Democracies Act. And that is exactly what we will be voting on today. First, defending our border from cartels. There are 200 kids a day dying in this country from fentanyl that we can trace directly back to that southern border. That's the equivalent of a Boeing 747 aircraft crashing every single day and nobody caring about it. We have to fix our southern border. Second, we're also going to defend the borders of our democratic allies, Israel, Taiwan, and Ukraine. Taiwan and Ukraine being invaded by communist dictators and Israel being invaded by terrorists. I would hope that we could all agree on those two concepts in this chamber. We have to defend borders and defend democracies. You can't pick and choose which one of those you're going to support. That is hypocritical and intellectually inconsistent. Defend our border and the borders of Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. All of the above. I'm proudly going to vote for all three. And I yield back.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman is recognized.
Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Manning.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of H.R. 8034, the long overdue aid to our democratic ally Israel. Israel is fighting an existential battle against Iran and its proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah. I have seen with my own eyes the gruesome devastation wrought by Hamas's October 7th terrorist attack, and I worry every day about the hostages who are still being held by Hamas. Last Saturday, Iran unleashed an unprecedented attack on Israel with 300 drones and missiles. If only one ballistic missile had hit its target, there would have been devastating loss of life, loss of Jews, Muslims, and Christians. I ask my colleagues to remember a no vote would deny much-needed humanitarian aid and much-needed funding for the nonprofit security grant program to help high-risk religious institutions in our country. The world is watching to see if we will stand with our allies, with Israel and Ukraine, in their time of need. I urge my colleagues to vote yes.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're in a war we didn't choose. Dictators with rule of gun invading democracies with rule of law. We see this with the invasion by Putin. But I'm really grateful to see the bipartisanship here today. Donald Trump established the embassy in Jerusalem. He stood with Israel. He sent Javelin missiles to stop Putin and Ukraine. He put American troops in Poland to stop war criminal Putin. It was Donald Trump that tried to stop Nord Stream 2, which finances the oppression by Putin of the people of Russia, leading to the assassination of Alexei Navalny. I yield back.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
We can do no less than to come to this floor today to be the American and the America that we have known around the world to become. And that is freedom-loving, democracy standing for, and watching our men and women go overseas, in many instances, to shed their blood for others, as well as the American people. I cannot stand by while babies die and while mothers lose their babies in their womb. Stand today so that we can make sure that the people in Gaza continuously have the funding that is necessary, that Israel and Ukraine can stand up for others while they're fighting for democracy. It is important to take note that our allies include Taiwan as well. It is important to note as well that the future of America is not yesterday, it is now. Are we going to accept the challenge of being the kind of nation that does not selfishly stand for itself, but fights for others? Let us vote for this funding bill because the war must end in peace and must end now. End the war now in peace. I yield back.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire how much time is remaining?
The gentleman has 3.5 minutes remaining.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. Is everybody prepared to close?
I'd like to ask the gentlelady, we have one more speaker remaining. Does the gentlelady have any speakers?
We have no more speakers.
I'll yield myself what time I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I'm prepared to close, so I'm going.
The gentleman reserves.
I reserve the reserve. The gentlelady want any more time?
The gentlewoman is recognized.
I am prepared to close, and I reserve.
The gentlewoman is recognized to close.
This bill provides urgently needed humanitarian aid for millions of civilians who have been caught in a crossfire across many theaters, whether it is Ukraine against the Russian aggression, Israel in its war against Iran and its proxies like Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis, our Indo-Pacific partners against an adversarial China. Innocent families today are in danger, children are starving, and civilian casualties are mounting in conflict zones all around the world. The humanitarian support in this bill would make sure that we are not leaving these people behind. It is, again, so critically important that the United States demonstrate its support for its allies, and it is leadership when it comes to humanitarian assistance wherever it is needed. And we come here to govern, we come here to take our responsibilities seriously, and I believe that the majority of people here do take responsibilities seriously. Today we have the ability to help to make a difference, and in this piece of legislation, in addition to our support for our ally Israel, we have the moral responsibility to provide humanitarian assistance. The United States cannot stand by and watch people starve to death, be caught in crossfires without our standing up and saying no. I urge my colleagues to vote for this bill. It really, the moment, as I said at another meeting this week, the moment has met us. We need to meet that moment. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman is recognized.
In closing, this is the day we're going to act. I urge all my colleagues to support these critical national security bills. They provide the resources necessary to bolster our military, reassure our allies and partners, and commit to stand against tyranny. The world is waiting, watching, and wanting America to lead. This is our moment. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 1160, the previous question is ordered on the bill. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill making emergency supplemental appropriations to respond to the situation in Israel for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes.
Under Clause 10 of Rule 20, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3602 as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 3602, a bill to prohibit the intentional hindering of immigration, border, and customs controls, and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 215, the nays are 199. Two-thirds not being in the affirmative, the rules are not suspended, the bill is not passed. Pursuant to House Resolution 1160 and Rule 18, the chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 8038. Will the gentleman from New York, Mr. Molinaro, kindly take the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 8038, which the clerk will report by title.
H.R. 8038, a bill to authorize the President to impose certain sanctions with respect to Russia and Iran and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose earlier today, a request for recorded vote on Amendment Number 2, printed in Part E of House Report 118-466, offered by the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Nunn, had been postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, the unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 2, printed in Part E of House Report 118-466, offered by the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Nunn, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in Part E of House Report number 118-466, offered by Mr. Nunn of Iowa.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote. Seconds.
On this vote, the yeas are 249 and the nays are 167. The amendment is adopted. There being no further amendment under the rule, the committee rises. Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 8038, and pursuant to House Resolution 1160, I report the bill as amended by that resolution back to the House with sundry further amendments adopted in the Committee of the Whole.
Beautiful. Thank you again.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 8038, and pursuant to House Resolution 1160, reports the bill as amended pursuant to that resolution back to the House with sundry further amendments adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. Pursuant to House Resolution 1160, the question on adoption of the further amendments will be put in gross. The question is on adoption of the amendment. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. The question is on the engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to authorize the President to impose certain sanctions with respect to Russia and Iran and for other purposes.
The question is on the passage of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, say no. The ayes have it. The bill. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
I request the yeas and the nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for the electronic vote on the question of passage of H.R. 8036. This is a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 360 and the nays are 58. The bill is passed without objection. A motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the passage of H.R. 8036, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 8036, a bill making emergency supplemental appropriations for assistance for the Indo-Pacific region and for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes.
The question is on the passage of the bill. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. One minute.
On this vote, the yeas are 385 and the noes are 34, with one answering present. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to House Resolution 1160 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 8035. Will the gentleman from New York, Mr. Molinaro, kindly take the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 8035, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill making emergency supplemental appropriations to respond to the situation in Ukraine and for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose earlier today, a request for recorded vote on Amendment Number 4, printed in Part B of House Report 118-466, offered by the gentlewoman from Florida, Mrs. Kamic, had been postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in Part B of House Report 118-466, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment Number 1 by Ms. Sparts of Indiana, Amendment Number 2 by Ms. Green of Georgia, Amendment Number 4 by Ms. Kamic of Florida. The Chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote in this series. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on Amendment Number 1, printed in Part B of House Report 118-466, offered by the gentlewoman from Indiana, Ms. Sparts, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment Number 1, printed in Part B of House Report Number 118-466, offered by Ms. Sparts of Indiana.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted, a sufficient number having risen. A recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 105, the nays are 319. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business of the request for recorded vote on amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report 118-466, offered by the gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Green, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-466, offered by Ms. Green of Georgia.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote. One minute. Seconds. All members voted. Does any member wish to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 71, the nays are 351. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on amendment number 4, printed in Part B of House Report 118-466, offered by the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Kamic, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-466, offered by Mrs. Kamic of Florida.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote.
Members voted.
On this vote, the yeas are 154, the nays are 272. The amendment is not adopted. There being no further amendments under the rule, the committee rises. State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 8035, and pursuant to House Resolution 1160, I report the bill as amended by that resolution back to the House.
Thank you, Mr.
The chair of the Committee of the Whole, House on the State of the Union, reports that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 8035, and pursuant to House Resolution 1160, reports the bill as amended by that resolution back to the House. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
Making emergency supplemental appropriations to respond to the situation in Ukraine and for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes.
The House will be in order. The House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? The clerk will report the motion.
Texas moves to recommit the bill H.R. 8035 to the Committee on Appropriations.
Pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 19, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. No. It's close. In the opinion of the chair, in the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Texas.
Request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 5-minute vote on the motion to recommit will be followed by 5-minute votes on passage of H.R. 8035 and passage of H.R. 8034. Huh? This is a 5-minute vote. Minutes. The yeas are 88, the nays are 336. The motion is not adopted. The question is on the passage of the bill. Pursuant to Clause 10 of Rule 20, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. flags on the floor. The chair has said it, the speakers repeated it. Please put the flags down and resume the vote. The House will be in order. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change your vote? On this vote, the yeas are 311 and the nays are 112. The bill is passed. Oh, one voting present. I missed it, but thank you. Okay. The House will be in order. The House will be in order. The chair would remind my colleagues to observe proper decorum. Flag waving on the floor is not appropriate. The House will be in order. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise? I said, no. The gentlewoman from Florida.
Stand up.
Okay. The gentlewoman is not recognized. Colleagues, no, I'm going to. The House will be in order. All members are reminded to observe decorum. Speakers are reminded to address the chair. And pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the passage of H.R. 8034, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 8034, a bill making emergency supplemental appropriations to respond to the situation in Israel and for related expenses for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2024, and for other purposes.
The question is on the passage of the bill. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. voted. Does any member wish to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 366 and the nays are 58. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to House Resolution 1160, the Senate amendment to H.R. 815 is considered as agreed to with the amendment described in Section 6 of House Resolution 1160. Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., April 20th, 2024. I hereby designate the period from Saturday, April 20th, 2024 through Sunday, April 28th, 2024 as a district work period under Section 3Z of House Resolution 5. Signed, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to take from the Speaker's table the concurrent resolution, S-Con Res 29, and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the concurrent resolution.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 29, concurrent resolution providing for a correction in the enrollment of H.R. 815.
Is there objection to the consideration of the concurrent resolution? Without objection, the concurrent resolution is agreed to and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well done.
Pursuant to Section 3Z of House Resolution 5, the House stands adjourned until 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday, April 23, 2024.